Good evening, my darlings. Have you ever felt controlled? As if your choices weren't your own? This evening, I invite you to peer into the shadows where control is both literal and sinister. Tonight's tale is called The Marionette's Dance. Let us drift into a world where strings can bind more than limbs. They can shackle souls. Shall we begin? Of course we shall. You're already hooked, aren't you? Our story centers on Eleanor, a young and gifted artist carving out a life for herself in the expansive, lonely cityscape. Her specialty? Lifelike marionettes, handcrafted with meticulous care, each one an eerie embodiment of human emotion. She was celebrated by critics, admired by peers, but felt oddly invisible, unseen in the way that matters most. Her studio sat at the edge of an old industrial district, its abandoned factories looming like petrified giants. It was here she spent nights laboring over wooden figures that seemed to watch her as she worked. Last month, Eleanor received an unusual commission. A wealthy, reclusive man named Gilbert desired a marionette that would mirror his late wife. He described her beauty with obsessive precision. Her almond-shaped eyes, a dimple that appeared with her faint smiles, and auburn curls that seemed to glow under sunlight. Eleanor, drawn by the challenge, agreed. Gilbert was willing to pay beyond anything she'd ever earned before. But money wasn't what compelled her. It was his grief. It seemed to seep through his every word, curling around her like smoke. Words charged with desperation are hard to refuse. The first night of work on the marionette was uneventful. Eleanor sharpened her chisels, prepared the wood, and began carving the delicate facial contours. At first, it felt like any other creation. But as days passed, odd things began to happen. The tools acted against her hands. A sanding motion felt like a caress. A slip of her knife brought curves to life that she hadn't planned. The marionette seemed to demand its form rather than obey her design. Her usual mastery over her craft seemed defied. By the 7th day, the doll was near completion, and Eleanor constantly felt watched. She blamed the feeling on her exhaustion and the solitary late hours. That is, until she heard the whispers. The first was faint, distorted, like a radio signal in the distance. It called her name, Eleanor. One word, low and melodic, but unmistakable. It dampened her resolve, but she convinced herself she was imagining things. Artists live in their heads, after all. When the marionette was done, draped in a satin gown with features so human it chilled her, Eleanor invited Gilbert to collect his prize. He arrived the next evening with his driver, his mood shifting between elation and sorrow. As soon as his eyes met the marionette, a gasp escaped him. "It's her," he uttered, tears filling his eyes. Eleanor's discomfort grew as she watched Gilbert embrace the inanimate figure. It wasn't gratitude she felt from him. It was intention. Malice cloaked in grief. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She dreamt of distant strings pulling at her limbs, cutting into her skin. Her breathing grew shallow, as though she were dangling over a void. When she finally woke, drenched in sweat, her arms ached as though they had truly been yanked by invisible hands. In the following days, things escalated. She saw Gilbert's marionette, not just in her dreams, but in the corners of her vision. Whether in the mirror, her peripheral sight, or at her window, its glass eyes stared hungrily. Desperate to break free of her fear, Eleanor decided to investigate Gilbert. Her research didn't yield much. That is, until she found a shocking connection. 3 artists before her had worked on commissions for Gilbert. None disappeared outright, but all had withdrawn from public life shortly after their creations entered his home. They'd shut their studios, rewritten wills, left families behind, lost to obscurity. Her final act was weaving the pieces together. Gilbert wasn't simply grieving. He was collecting souls through the vessels they created with their very hands. Eleanor realized with horror that the strings in her recurring dreams were not mere nightmares. They were Gilbert's. Heaven help her. she was attached. Now, darlings, you may be curious as to how the tale ends. Eleanor sought counsel from an occultist, one who whispered of severed ties and binding rituals. But magic has a price, and the price of freedom is often identity. The last anyone saw Eleanor, she had abandoned her art for anonymity. No name, no history to pass along. Except, of course, that she is the first story, the very first doll. What's that? Did I mention the doll's budding human blush as Gilbert cradled her? No? Well, some details are simply better felt than told. So, dear viewers, does this story linger like frayed strings tickling the edge of your consciousness? Because trust me, it's only a story, nothing more. Or is it? Sweet dreams. Don't let the marionettes dance in your sleep. Good night, my darling night dwellers.